Live from Minneapolis. It's the show that seriously questions the quality control over at DreamWorks, but at this point is just too tired to care. It's also the show that left his boom mic on the stand for that bit and now has to take it off. The fuck? So I went to see The Wild Robot a few weeks ago, and it was so good that I almost made just like a rant video about it right when I got back. But I was kind of late to the party on this one, so I figured I'd wait till it came out on streaming, give it a full breakdown. Plus, it gave me an excuse to rewatch this absolute gem of a movie. If there was an elevator pitch for this film, it would be, it's one of those movies where you finish watching it and then you just want to watch it again. I asked a couple of my buddies who watched it with me what they actually thought of it and if they wanted to give a little blurb of their own. And one of them said, and I quote, "It just made me really happy and put me in a good mood." And the other one said, "Fink is the GOAT," and I quote, "It's one of those movies where I feel like saying, yeah, it was a good movie would be sufficient without any additional explanation." So yeah, this video just ended. Bit aside, The Wild Robot is an absolute tour de force in cinematography, animation, and character work. This movie made me emotional more times than I really care to admit, and it has what feels like a dozen different peak moments. Like, I thought I saw the actual climax like 4 times before I saw the real climax first time through this thing. There's such a momentous grandeur to so many of the scenes in this movie, but there's also a tenderness to its quieter moments that I really like, along with some good humor and great commentary on motherhood and nature tossed in. There's so much good here that it's actually kind of hard to know where to start, but I'm going to start with what got me to see this in the first place. I saw this movie based on art style alone. I didn't know anything about the characters, the script, the actors, none of that shit. I saw an ad watching a football game, saw the art style, and said, yeah, I'm watching that shit. And let me tell you, this movie looks incredible. I'd still say Across the Spider-Verse is probably the best looking animated movie right now, but this one has to be the most beautiful. Half the shots in this movie feel like they belong in a David Attenborough documentary. Like, this is some serious Planet Earth shit. Every locale in this movie is just popping with color, and they're all just so beautifully brought to life. Apparently, a team of artists worked on hundreds of paintings for the background in this movie, and it pays off, man. This is art that will never fade. It also apparently took about a week per painting, so DreamWorks had to have had these guys just like sleeping on the floor, but do it again. The color on display in this movie is nuts, by the way, not just in the backgrounds, but in literally every scene. Every locale in this movie feels like it has its own color palette. Shit, we can even have multiple scenes in the same location and they'll feel completely different just based on color and lighting alone. Me personally, I did not expect this much variety and tone when it came to the colors and the art style. Like, I thought we'd get our standard nature shit, you know, you get the blue sky, there's green trees, there's like brown wood or whatever, but nah, man, this movie's got some crazy stuff in it. The first half is all like,
but Oz never did give nothing to the Tin Man that he didn't already have.
But then the second half is like, tell me if you hadn't read the books prior to watching this that you expected shots like this in this movie. The color doesn't end at the environments either. It's also applied to character models. So we get these great shots during the migration scene where the geese go from shaded to in the sun and they basically change colors. It's like that one Love, Death, and Robots episode with the flying fish. It's just so surreal and it's awesome to look at. The climax demonstrates a masterclass of this color manipulation, by the way. We have the blue lighting and the reddish pink fire on opposite sides of the characters, and it creates a completely different tone to locations we've been in many times. And by the way, this is right after we have the flares going overhead, which turns everything like golden yellow, and it's just nuts how often they decide to go completely sicko mode with this stuff, and it works every time. One thing I do want to mention with respect to the visuals themselves is that the animation is definitely not as flashy as something like Puss in Boots, which makes sense because that's a movie about a sword-fighting cat, and this is a much slower and more emotional narrative about family and parenting. That doesn't mean the movie slacks off when it comes to the hype, by the way. The Wild Robot has the sauce. I'm gonna point to a half a dozen moments, like this shot with the flare or the rock missiles, but if you want a case study on why this movie is hype, just look at Bright Bill's training arc. Maren Morris came through with an absolute banger of a song, and it starts out slow and pensive as Bright Bill remains unsure of his ability to fly, but then this hawk dude shows up and the music kicks in and this fucking dive, man, holy shit. I was watching this in the theater and I was just grinning from ear to ear for like 5 minutes. Like this is test drive level shit we're experiencing right now. These guys have not fallen off at all in 10 years. There's just tons and tons of visual flourish everywhere in this movie, and while it's not necessarily the character animation like Puss in Boots, it can be something like a backdrop. Like the backdrop of the conversation between Roz and the possum is literally just this super vibrant pink, and it's amazing. Like, they did not have to go this hard for this. Something out of the Across the Spider-Verse playbook where we're going to have a conversation that slows down the movie a little bit, and we're going to get a little bit more personal with the characters, but that doesn't mean we have to slack off with the visuals at all. The cinematography is no slouch either. It'd be pretty much impossible to mention all the shots I like in this movie because I like pretty much all of them. But since you asked, here's a couple of my favorites. I love the shot that follows Fink here. Like, the camera literally follows him around the scene, and it literally like slinks around, just mimicking his movement as a fox, which I think is sick. One of the most unique shots in the film is probably this wide angle one from the introduction, and I'm a huge fan of the perspective in this movie. The movie is constantly changing the position of the camera to suit the focus of whatever character is in the scene or in the frame. Since there's such a large size difference on display between Roz, Baby Bright Bill, and everything in between, the camera is placed on different planes and at different angles depending on who's in frame to fit everyone in frame. And I think it's really impressive how well the animators do to keep everyone in frame while not just having them lined up. Like, you'll have Bright Bill standing in the front, Roz is behind him, and then Fink is just like on a rock somewhere in the background. And it's kind of impressive that they just have so much variety in the visual language of the movie, even in mundane stuff like this. I think in a worse version of this movie, or really just worse movies in general, people kind of just stand in a line or like across from each other when they're talking. And this movie's like, hell nah. Go crazy. One of my favorite uses of perspective, though, is Roz's first walk through the forest, where the camera is placed at the height of the animals just to show how out of place Roz is, because she literally just doesn't even fit in the frame from their perspective. One tiny little detail, I love how Roz's lights flicker with the thunder in the scene. I know it seems like I'm fixating on superfluous details here, but man, that's what fucking art is. It's that little bit of extra effort you put into something just to make it pop, that little bit of extra sauce. And that's what this movie has in spades. I think if anything, the one spot I wasn't sold on this movie, visually speaking, was probably the character designs. Because at first glance, Roz doesn't really scream intriguing protagonist or something that I want to get emotionally connected to. And hot damn was I wrong about that. They do so much with her eyes alone to express emotion, even though that's literally like the only feature on her face. She doesn't have a mouth. There's no ears. We have no appendages. We stepped down like at least 2 tiers from Toothless. All we have is the eyes, and it still works. The addition of shutters for eyelids is great. And just the fact that her eyes are big LEDs means that the brightness can directly reflect her emotions, which I'll touch on later. The LEDs on her body I thought was kind of just a gimmick at first. Like, yeah, it allows us to visually distinguish her from the background, like when she rolls down the hill onto Bright Bill's family. But what they do with it is that they light up when she speaks. So when she's stuttered or flustered, her lights are blinking back and forth really fast. And I just think that's a really cool way to denote her emotional state. The way Roz is animated is impressive as well. She starts out doing, like robot stuff, like she twists her torso independent of her legs. But as the movie goes on, she starts to move a little bit more naturally, and this is also reflected by her voice actor, Lupita Nyong'o. Holy shit, I hope I said that right. Her role in this movie is really not being talked about enough because she does such a good job, both as the overly upbeat helper robot and the fully adjusted mother. The way she changes her cadence and delivery throughout the film.
I see your problem. I prefer he be independent, closer to home. I love you too.
To demonstrate Roz's growth and her adjustment to nature is why I think voice acting should be its own Oscar category, because this shit is a skill, man. Everybody else does great in their roles, by the way, and some of them blend in ridiculously well. Like, tell me you knew Mark Hamill was the bear before searching that up. I basically like every side character in this movie. It feels like one of them should be annoying. Like, one of them should really just not be funny, because remember, this is DreamWorks. This is the CEO of unfunny side characters, and somehow they're all endearing and entertaining. I like the beaver. He's funny. I like the possum kids. They're funny. And I think once again, DreamWorks is just back at it and showcasing their ability to write witty jokes.
It's okay. I won't eat him. Are you crazy? I might eat him.
Another thing I've noticed DreamWorks balling on recently is the way they animate talking animals. Talking animals in movies are kind of a weird subject because some people just animate them like humans. Besides having an entire scene to explain why Roz can understand the animals, which is actually a really cool scene in and of itself, I think DreamWorks has perfected the ability to toe the line between animal that talks like a human and the actual animal itself. I started noticing this with Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, with the difference in how the characters are animated and how they move, like Kitty landing on all fours after getting launched, or the way Perito walks. It's all very specific to the kind of animal that they are, and it gives them extra flavor and personality outside of their lines and voice acting. I think that carries over well in this movie as well. Fink is obviously a case study with the way both his relaxed poses and his aggressive actions perfectly embody that of a fox. I also think it's cool that they switch between noises that an actual fox would make and Pedro Pascal's voice acting to blur their line further. And they add a ton of little details around his face to make him seem more like an actual animal rather than a person inhabiting an animal's body. A good example being when he bares his teeth when talking about Roz. I think when people discuss this movie in the future, though, the thing that's really going to stand out to them is the themes and the emotion. The Wild Robot is simultaneously a commentary on both motherhood and nature, although more the former than the latter. Right out of the gate, death is presented to the viewer. Roz has the crab swollen out of her hand. There's a bird head on screen somehow. I don't know how they got away with that. And overall, the movie doesn't shy away from the concept of death.
Death's proximity makes life burn all the brighter.
When Roz and Fink go to rescue the animals of the island from the blizzard, they actually find one that's dead. And while the movie doesn't really have a cavalier attitude towards death, I think that it definitely acknowledges that as part of nature's process, and that's kind of just how things go. I think it's this realistic look at nature that plays perfectly into the parenting commentary in this movie with the nature versus nurture aspect going on. I think this movie does a fantastic job to showcase all of the different emotions and feelings someone might have becoming a parent, the highs, the lows, and all the aggravating stuff in between. Dialogue is really sharp around these moments, especially in the first interaction between Roz and Possum Catherine O'Hara. I think it's crazy how much ground the movie is able to cover just within the bounds of parenting as a concept. Like, we have dialogue on the obligation a mother feels, a parent feeling left out due to shared interest between the other parent and their kid, the role of mentorship in parenting, letting go and letting your kid find his place in the world and with his friends, helicopter parenting, even some stuff on how nature and instinct relate to programming. And I think it's all handled deftly with well-written scenes and expressive characters. And while I think the emotional highs of this movie are pretty much unmatched, like, this scene makes me want to run through a brick wall, the lows are equally effective. The scene where Bright Bill confronts Roz on the fate of his family is heart-wrenching, and I really love this moment.
You don't feel anything.
Like, dude, she felt that shit. I like the scene where Roz just admits that she has no idea what to do as a parent, and I really like the "I have a kid" line, because no matter how smart we feel or how smart the tools we create are, there's no one-size-fits-all solution for this parenting thing.
I have a kid.
But I think that's the most satisfying part of this movie, is that Roz figures out how to be a parent, and she figures out how to fit into the ecosystem of the island, and it's kind of just satisfying to watch. Fink gets quite a bit of development as well, and we get a lot of lines that kind of hint at his past. At first, it's a throwaway joke about how his mom taught him how to swim, but later on, it's something a lot deeper.
Yeah, well, when you grow up without something, you spend a lot of time thinking about it.
He gets to sort of be another parent to Bright Bill while also occupying the fun uncle role, and I think it's just kind of an interesting dichotomy. I think the best way to demonstrate how well the character arcs in this movie are handled is the juxtaposition of Fink's two storytelling scenes. In the scene where he lulls Bright Bill to sleep, he describes storytelling as lying adjacent, and he kind of seems grossed out by the entire thing. By the way, DreamWorks is still getting their fairytale kicks in with this sequence. Later in the movie, though, Fink sits with the kids of the island and tells a heartfelt story about Roz. No lying, no mixed emotions, no needing a drink after. He's just a completely different character because of his experience, and I love that. Overall, there's just so much in this movie. There's so much, and it never feels like too much. We never dwell on one topic for too long, and it always feels like we're moving forward, whether that be developmentally for one of the characters or through the plot of the movie. This thing is just over 100 minutes long, and it feels way longer in a good way. Like I said earlier, it feels like there's about 5 climaxes in this movie, and there's probably about 10 good moments before those even start. There's even a pretty good villain in this movie, and she doesn't really get a lot of time in the story to make an impact because it wouldn't make sense to introduce her earlier, but I like her while she's here. I haven't even touched on some of the better jokes.
As a mother of 6 babies.
Or the CMC robot hand that's animated to its own personality, or the lore. This movie just moves at such a brisk pace while still allowing its emotional core to breathe, and I think that's a really tight balancing act that it did a great job doing. There's only one scene of actual exposition, and there's really only one spot I would argue the pacing drags a little bit, and it's that first quarter where Ross is introduced to the island. I'm not really sure which scene you would trim here, but I think it just feels a little bit longer than it should. Really, the only thing negative you can say about this movie is that the plot isn't that original. Like, this is basically The Iron Giant. But one, The Iron Giant is a pretty fucking good movie. And two, I don't really mind an unoriginal premise to a story as long as you tell it with original characters and original moments. Honestly, this is just one of the best movies of the last couple years. As of recording, I've seen this movie 4 times, and I had to make this video just to get it off my chest so I wouldn't keep watching it. So anyway, to wrap this up, I may or may not go watch The Water Robot for a 5th time. Fink is the GOAT. Hug your mom. I'm gonna go shoot a deer.